Mom, I've been pinching pennies to send money home, and now you're saying banning me from visiting? Isn't that a bit harsh? Said the daughter-in-law angrily. Banned from the house? What's that about? I didn't understand what she was talking about, so I furrowed my brows in confusion. My son and his wife always send me money, living alone as I do. I'm deeply grateful for the significant money they send, so being banned is absolutely out of the question. Yet, why has it come to this? And not even a thank you? That's incredibly rude. Wait, can you explain a bit more about what you're talking about? Something was off. Something was wrong. I decided to calm down my agitated daughter-in-law and listen to her story. Then, an unbelievable truth came to light. This is unacceptable. We'll have to teach them a lesson. Confronted with conflicting facts, the two of us stood up. Thus, I and my daughter-in-law decided to take revenge on the person who caused this misunderstanding. I am Yulia. I've been a corporate worker living frugally with my son Richard since my divorce 10 years ago. Becoming a single mother, I didn't want my son to suffer, so I worked multiple jobs desperately. Maybe my son felt lonely because of it, but I managed to combine the money I earned and the child support from my ex-husband to successfully send him to the private university he wanted to attend. I still remember him saying on the day he got accepted, "Mom, thank you so much. I'm gonna do my best." Children grow up so fast, and Richard graduated from college in no time, then started working at the company run by my ex-husband. Even after our divorce, Richard had a good relationship with his father, and they kept in touch often. I never blamed him for having a relationship with his father, and I didn't complain when he decided to work for his father's company out of respect for his decision. When he decided to work for his father's company out of respect for his decision. After becoming an adult, Richard married a woman named Natalie. She also worked at the same company. My daughter-in-law was not particularly friendly by any stretch. Even when we met to get acquainted, she was expressionless all the time. And even now that she's married to my son, I've never seen her smile. When we talk, she doesn't start conversations, responding only minimally to greetings and necessary dialogue. She probably doesn't like me very much. My son looked happy with her, so I didn't oppose their marriage and blessed their union. Upon marriage, my son moved out. Living alone in the house we used to share, the emptiness became palpable. While I was happy that Richard had successfully left the nest, I had braced myself for this day, but the loneliness still hit hard. The couple moved to a different city within the same state, so while I could see them if necessary, they weren't exactly close by. I was worried I wouldn't see my son much anymore after he moved out. Though I thought this, he would occasionally drop by even after getting married. At first, I held back because I didn't want to impose on his new wife, but he said, "I thought you'd be lonely if I just disappeared, Mom." He's truly a thoughtful son. The time we spent eating and chatting together was my healing time. "Thanks, Mom, the meal was delicious. And sorry, but..." When my son would come over, he would awkwardly ask for some spending money at the end of his visit. His wife Natalie probably didn't like it, but thinking about him still coming to visit made me want to give it to him. Besides, being newlyweds, they probably had a lot of expenses, like furniture. Sometimes he would ask for a big amount like $1,000, which might surprise me, but maybe he wanted to make a good impression on his new wife. I had given him money a few times as a thank you for visiting. Even though we are family, the way he respectfully bowed his head when thanking me made it feel worthwhile. I'm grateful that my son visits, but I've sworn to live each day without causing any trouble for him and his wife as much as possible. Perhaps it was this determination that led me to push myself too hard at work. I suffered a stroke at my workplace. According to the hospital, overwork was the cause. A coworker noticed something was off with me and quickly called an ambulance, but I was left with a disability. My walking speed has decreased, and I've lost my sense of balance, making it necessary to lean on something to stand up or change direction. Walking alone became difficult. Perhaps if I had eased up on my work, this wouldn't have happened. How am I supposed to explain this to my son? After being told I needed to stay in the hospital for a while, I called my son to let him know about my situation and that I wouldn't be able to come home. Richard and Natalie rushed to the hospital immediately. "Mom, are you okay? I heard about the walking disability." Richard burst through the door and rushed to my bedside. With a worried look, he gently held my hand. Natalie followed him and stood beside him, as calm as ever. She was expressionless as usual, and it was hard to tell what she was thinking. Her cold gaze seemed to say that this was a hassle. "I really can't burden them." "Thanks for both coming, but I'm fine." "You're obviously not fine, you're in the hospital. We're gonna visit you often." "It's okay, you don't have to. You tend to overreact." "It's not an overreaction. I'm worried about you, right, Natalie?" When Richard sought her agreement, Natalie reluctantly nodded. Even though I felt uneasy about Natalie, I was internally happy that they were coming to visit. From then on, the busy working couple would visit me on weekends. The conversation was mostly between Richard and me, while Natalie quietly handled things like changing clothes or arranging the visitation gifts. It was fun to talk with my son, but the distance between Natalie and me didn't seem to close. Even when I said thank you, she would just reply in a low tone, "No problem," without much warmth. Then one day, Richard came to visit alone. Before I could ask how Natalie was, Richard started speaking. "Hey Mom, I've been thinking of sending you some money from now on." I was surprised by the sudden suggestion. I never expected my son, who had been asking for pocket money, to offer such a thing. "I shouldn't take it," I said, but Richard just gave me a gentle smile. "You quit your job, right? With your disability, it's gonna be tough after you leave the hospital. It's better to have some money." Because of my walking disability, I had quit my job since I couldn't work as before. I planned to look for a job I could still do, and with my savings, I should be okay for a while. "That's okay, you and Natalie earned that money, use it for yourselves?" "What are you talking about? You put me through college. Let me repay you and show my gratitude." With such a strong offer from Richard, I decided to accept his generosity. I wanted to cherish the thoughtfulness of my son, who was always thinking of me. I was proud to see how much he had grown. From that day, Richard began visiting the hospital alone. With a guilty look, he would hand me $10. "Sorry, this is all I can give right now. I was planning to give more, but Natalie gets upset. She says we should prioritize our own family first." "No, I'm just happy you're sending anything. Could you thank Natalie for me?" "Sure, I'll tell her tonight." It seems Natalie isn't pleased with the money being sent to me. It looks like she won't be visiting me anymore. Still, since Richard continues to send money, I wanted to at least express my gratitude to Natalie, so I always handed him a thank you note. I carefully put the $10 into my wallet, and the days of chatting with my son continued for 3 months until I was discharged. Walking was still difficult, and I couldn't move around the house as before. While I was hospitalized, Richard had suggested that we might need to remodel the house for caregiving, but that would require their involvement and presence during the process. Thinking I could manage in my familiar home and not wanting to burden them further, I hesitated, but it seemed remodeling might be necessary after all. Caring for me, Richard started coming over once a week around noon. He would do the shopping for me or withdraw a month's living expenses on my behalf. It was a great relief to have Richard taking care of various things. On a certain weekday, after a long absence, Natalie made a rare visit to my house. "I'm sorry for the sudden visit. May I come in?" Natalie's expression was stern. Her voice also sounded somewhat angry. "Yes, of course, but what brings you here all of a sudden? Did you come with Richard?" "No, I came alone. Richard doesn't know." A visit without Richard knowing was indeed unusual. I invited Natalie into the living room for the time being. I was about to serve some tea, but she shook her head, so I sat down and she took a seat opposite me. With a stern face, she glared at me and said in a low growling voice, "Mom, I know you don't like me, but I've been saving desperately and sending you a lot of money. Despite that, not only do you not thank me, But what's this about banning me from visiting? Natalie's words puzzled me, and I furrowed my brow in confusion. A lot of money? Banned from visiting? She thinks I dislike her? What on earth is she talking about? I couldn't make sense of the story, so now it was my turn to ask her. Wait, what do you mean? That's my line. Didn't you say you couldn't stand me and wanted me to stop coming over? That you didn't want to see my face or speak with me? I was stunned. How did things get to this point? Apparently, Richard had told her that I had said those things. I had never thought any such thing, let alone said she was banned. Every time I received the money, I had given Richard a thank you note to pass on to her. I've never said you were banned. There should have been thank you notes as well, right? Thank you notes? Now it was Natalie's turn to frown. According to her, she had never received any thank you notes. Looking at her expression, she seemed to be telling the truth. That's strange. Richard always said, "I'll pass it on to Natalie." Could it really be that she never received any? Before addressing that, there was something else I needed to ask about. It was about a lot of money. I was receiving $10 from my son. The value of a lot of money can be subjective, but to me, $10 certainly wasn't a large sum. However, I cherished it, thinking of it as a kind gesture from Richard and Natalie. But I had a feeling that wasn't what she meant. I just want to clarify, how much exactly are you saying you sent? If you're receiving it, you should know, shouldn't you? It's $26,000. $26,000? An absurdly large amount that made me exclaim in surprise. Indeed, that would definitely qualify as a lot of money. But I had never received such an amount from Richard. Wait a minute, I've only been getting $10 from Richard. $10? Stop joking around, I've been sending Richard $26,000. Now Natalie was the one astonished. If what she was saying was true, her reaction made sense. The supposed $26,000 turning into $10 was certainly a cause for shock. A strange silence followed our conflicting stories. Natalie, furrowing her brow and looking stern, was the one to break the silence. Mom, actually. She started to speak hesitantly. According to her, it was Natalie who had suggested sending the money in the first place. She raised her son on her own, and she respected me greatly for trying to live independently even now. She was pained to see the series of hardships I had faced culminating in my walking disability and suggested sending money to help. However, Richard opposed the idea. He said their own lives were more important and refused her proposal. After an argument, he reportedly spat out dismissively, "If you want to send money from your allowance, then just do it with whatever you're earned." She had immediately prepared $26,000 to bring on a visitation day, but Richard stopped her. She told me I'd forgotten to mention, Natalie doesn't have to visit anymore. She's banned from her house too. Mom hates Natalie and she's a burden. Never show your face to Mom again. I'll handle the money. Richard told her to stay home and took the money she had prepared to send. It was sad, but knowing herself to be reserved and easily misunderstood, she thought it couldn't be helped even if I disliked her. Her respect for me didn't change, even though she felt disliked. But it didn't sit right with her that she was banned and not even thanked while she was sending money from her own allowance. Then, hiding it from Richard, she decided to visit me to speak her mind. I was shocked. Natalie didn't seem like she was lying. It was hard to believe that my kind son would lie to both of us and embezzle money. I had never said I disliked her, but apparently, Richard had been ingraining the idea that I didn't think highly of Natalie for a long time. Her always being expressionless might have been influenced by Richard's actions. Then, a troubling thought struck me. Richard had been managing my bank account. With this story in mind, a dreadful premonition crossed my mind. No way, surely Richard wouldn't do such a thing. I explained the situation to Natalie, and she accompanied me to the bank. Nervously checking my bank account, I was shocked into silence. The balance is lower. The amounts Richard had been giving me and the figures in the bank account clearly didn't match. Richard had been skimming money. I could hear my trust crumbling inside. Natalie gently patted my back, offering consolation. Lost for words from the betrayal, she quietly spoke up. I hate to bring this up now, but Richard said he's staying at your place again this weekend. I'm sorry, but could you ask him to cut back on the frequent overnights? He doesn't come home at all during the weekends. Hearing the word overnights, I looked at Natalie. This weekend again? Richard has never stayed overnight. He comes in the morning, eats lunch, and leaves. That was the case last week too. It's always like that, so I assume it will be the same this week. Natalie's face fell. It seems Richard has been telling her he spends both weekend days at my house, but he doesn't return home. However, his visits are at most half a day long. Since his marriage, Richard had said Natalie would be lonely, and he never stayed overnight at my home. With a saddened expression, she murmured, I understand, and we parted ways. My doubts about Richard remained. A few days later, I received a call from Natalie. Richard has been having an affair. Hearing her words, I was speechless for a while. I had suspected something was off when he lied about staying at my place, but an affair was beyond my expectations. That day, suspicious of the discrepancies in our conversation, Natalie had secretly followed Richard after he said he would be home late. He left work on time and met someone. A strange woman appeared, and they walked arm in arm to a hotel. It must have been quite a shock. Her voice, trembling with anger and sorrow, conveyed how deeply Natalie was hurt. Stealing money, lying, and now cheating. I felt ashamed of such a despicable son and apologized to Natalie. The kind face he had shown me all this time must have been part of his schemes. At the same time, anger began to bubble up within me. I can't forgive this. Betraying me is one thing, but betraying his own wife is something else. As his mother, I couldn't just let his misdeeds go unchecked. Natalie, let's teach Richard a lesson. My voice was firm, and Natalie seemed surprised by my resolve. I can't forgive him either. But are you sure? He's your son. He's my son, and that's exactly why I need to correct him. He needs to understand what he has done. Natalie nodded vigorously, following my lead. Together, we decided to take action against my son. The following weekend, Richard came to my house as planned. After lunch, he began preparing to leave rather quickly. Natalie had told me that Richard said he would be staying at my house that day, but obviously, he had no intention of staying. He likely had plans to meet his mistress. Richard, rummaging through the drawer for the cash card, looked guilty as he spoke to me. Sorry, Mom, I'm busy today, so I'll just withdraw the money and head back. We haven't done this months yet, right? I inwardly smirked. No, if you're that busy, you don't need to withdraw anything today. I still have some money left from last month, so you can go back without worrying about it. I feigned ignorance, smoothly declining his request. My usual compliance turning into refusal surprised him, but he persisted. But Mom, you know having extra money never hurts. What if you run out? With your walking, withdrawing money would be difficult. I think it's fine to take out another month's worth now. Just the necessary amount is fine. If we withdraw too much, it might just lead to unnecessary spending. No matter how many times he was told, I shook my head in refusal, and Richard's smile twitched unnervingly. He seemed to be straining to maintain his expression. After frowning as if he was in a losing position, Richard then pleaded in a cajoling voice. It was a typical tactic of his. Then, I really hate to ask, but could you lend me some money? I'm in a bit of a bind. You know, Natalie gets mad about the money I send you. Instead of sending money and getting scolded, he should just stop sending it. I bit back the retort, forced a smile, and shook my head gently. Sorry, I actually have to run an errand soon, so I can't help you with money today. Maybe next time. All right, I'll just take the cash card then. That way I can get you the money quickly when you need it. It seemed like Richard realized that pushing further was futile after being denied 3 times. However, he still took the card and left the house. Normally, I would insist that he not take the card, but today, I let it slide. As soon as he left, I called Natalie. Natalie, Richard just left the house. Understood. Let's go. I had asked her to wait nearby my house, and with her help, we secretly followed Richard. He entered a convenience store and stopped in front of the ATM. Why can't I withdraw any money? Is this piece of junk broken? Richard's voice was irritable. He couldn't withdraw money and was cursing loudly. The reason was that he couldn't withdraw from my bank account. Richard, what are you doing? I told you today you didn't need any money. What? When I called out from behind him, Richard's shoulders jerked in surprise. He had been so focused on the ATM that he hadn't noticed our presence at all. In fact, I had changed the account's PIN a little while ago. Today was supposed to be the day he withdrew money for me. I assumed he was counting on my money, especially since he probably had plans to meet his mistress later and would need it. If he was the type to siphon off someone else's money, I figured he would head to the ATM regardless of what I said. I figured that someone who takes money without permission would head to the ATM regardless of how much I refused. My suspicions were confirmed. The plan was to catch him in the act of trying to withdraw money without permission. Mom? And Natalie? Why are you here? Richard was clearly shocked, not expecting us to be there, sweating profusely with disbelief written all over his face. He was sweating profusely, with disbelief written all over his face. Natalie quickly grabbed his arm. Let's go back to your mother's house for now. You know why, don't you, Richard? Richard stayed silent, not uttering a word. Quietly, he was led back to my house, and we sat across from him at the table. Natalie was seated next to me. You were trying to take money from my account without permission, weren't you? And I heard you've been skimming from the money Natalie sends too. She says she's been sending $26,000. Where did the rest go? What are you talking about, Mom? You believe Natalie over your own son? I would never do such a thing. As I pressed him calmly, Richard frantically denied everything. Then Natalie interjected. Quit the poor act, Richard. On top of everything, you're even cheating. Cheating? That's outrageous, stop slandering me. Where's the proof? Despite our confrontations, Richard continued to make excuses, clearly determined not to admit any wrongdoing. He seems determined not to admit any wrongdoing. Can you still make excuses after seeing this? I show the bank account balance, while Natalie confronts Richard with photos proving the affair. At that moment, Richard's face turns pale. His usually evasive mouth finally shuts. There's no escaping it now. However, sweating profusely and silent, Richard suddenly slams the table loudly. What's the big deal? So what if I cheated? Natalie, why do you give her the money instead of me? Give it to me. Pointing and shouting, Richard suddenly becomes defensive. He was gentle in front of me, but in front of his wife, he was like a tyrant. I had never seen this side of my son before. Now he points at me, shouting angrily. You say not to withdraw money. But it's only natural for you to give me money after making me feel lonely with just one parent around, isn't it? Every time I came over, you gave me money. Just be an ATM and don't talk back. Now I'm the one left speechless. I thought I was helping by fulfilling his wishes, thinking he felt lonely. But it turns out, I was just a convenient ATM to him. All those kind expressions were just a facade. I'm completely disillusioned by my son's drastic change. If that's how he thinks, I'm done holding back. To cheat and then tell your mother something like that is unbelievable. I want a divorce. I can no longer see you as my son. You're going to return all the money you took without permission. And make sure you repay Natalie too. Both of us make it clear, and then Richard starts to panic. Seeming distressed by the situation, tears fill his eyes as he frantically shakes his head and looks pleadingly at both me and Natalie. It's not like that, there's a reason for everything. His continued excuses were frustrating, even for his own mother. Gesticulating wildly, he begins his excuses again, looking like a pitiful abandoned puppy. You wouldn't know this, Mom, but Dad's business failed and he's been struggling with money. That's why I've been taking money to help him. What an excuse. Once again, I'm astounded by my son pulling his father into this. Oh really? I didn't know about that. Let's call him right now then. What? Richard's voice falters against my composed demeanor. I take out my smartphone without hesitation and dial my ex-husband. He probably thought mentioning the name of my ex-husband, whom we divorced, would get him off the hook from my questioning. Richard seems to believe that my ex-husband and I divorced on bad terms, but it was actually an amicable separation. I still occasionally talk to my ex-husband, especially since he knew about my walking disability. It's me. I heard you failed in business and are struggling financially? No, everything's going well here. Who said that? It was Richard. He said he's been taking money from my account to help you because you were in trouble. What's going on? While Richard panics, I explain everything to my ex-husband, who growls with contained anger. What? I understand the situation. I'll thoroughly investigate if Richard has been causing any trouble at the company too. Hearing this from her ex-husband, Richard turned deathly pale. Even within the family, he was causing such problems. It's possible he was involved in some serious misconduct at work too. I'm sorry. If I had been able to properly educate him both as an employee and as a person, none of this would have happened. I truly apologize to Natalie as well. I'll make sure Richard takes responsibility and compensates. I nodded and hung up the phone with my ex-husband. But it wasn't just the ex-husband's fault. This isn't it. Please forgive me, Mom. My son, still half crying, clung to me, but I knew I couldn't coddle him any longer and glared at him sternly. You betray your own wife and then try to blame others for the money you've stolen. Shame on you. Richard, I'm disowning you. No way! I was done letting him leech off me. Unable to make excuses and not forgiven, Richard slumped to the floor in despair. And so, the drama with my son came to a close. Afterwards, Richard and Natalie's divorce was finalized. Through lawyers, he agreed to repay the money he had withdrawn from my account and to deposit monthly the amount he had taken from Natalie's support. Natalie also sued Richard and his mistress for damages and successfully received her due compensation. According to my ex-husband's investigations, Richard had been acting haughty as the boss's son, delegating his work to other employees without doing much himself, and it all came out and he was fired. His subsequent re-employment efforts didn't last, and he's currently bouncing from job to job. Burdened by the repayments and damages, he had to leave the apartment he had been living in and has moved to an old apartment. Abandoned by his mistress, Richard now finds himself lonely and without anyone to rely on. On the other hand, I still see Natalie occasionally since her divorce from my son, and we discovered shared interests, and now she smiles at me when we talk. The frequent contacts with my ex-husband during this ordeal led to us reconciling after 10 years apart. Now, enjoying a renewed marital life, I'm living my days to the fullest.